Nice. Wow. Come on.
I mean, look, I'm a man that never regrets anything in life. I think everything happens for a reason. If I were to go back in time, I would say do exactly what I did, and that was grab the opportunity and ride that fucking wave as hard and as long as you can, and I'm still riding that wave.
You have to give Eddie Hall credit for one thing, his not making excuses. Even after suffering a serious injury just days before one of the biggest fights of his combat sports career, he's still standing by every decision he made. But at the same time, this is a brutal reminder of how unforgiving boxing can be. The reality is that Tommy Fury was preparing for a boxing match while Eddie Hall was trying to transition his raw strength and determination into a completely different sport. Injuries are always part of combat sports, but when you're carrying Eddie's size and intensity, every training session becomes a huge risk. What's interesting is that Eddie sounds like a man trying to stay positive despite knowing that everything may have changed overnight. The timing could not have been worse. Just when excitement for the fight was reaching its peak, the injury suddenly put the entire event into question.
I mean, it just says our choice. So their argument would be, well, if we put up the money, tough, you do as we say. Not quite right, but there is an element of that as well. But we need to know where the fight's going to be. What's the date the fight's going to be.
This was the moment fans started realizing the situation was becoming serious. When promoters begin discussing delays, dates, and uncertainty, it usually means the original plan is hanging by a thread. From Tommy Fury's perspective, this must be incredibly frustrating. Fighters structure their entire lives around training camps. Every day is scheduled. Every session has a purpose. To suddenly hear that dates may change because your opponent has suffered an injury is never ideal. At the same time, boxing is a business. If the fight can't happen safely, it can't happen at all. The challenge now becomes finding a solution that works for everyone involved without killing the momentum that made the matchup attractive in the first place.
Very tough, great engine, but he has to fight proper opposition. You know, he's a world-class fighter that's not fighting world-class opposition.
The interesting thing here is that the conversation quickly shifted from the injury itself to the level of competition. Tommy Fury has repeatedly been criticized throughout his career, but one thing people can't deny is that he is a trained boxer. Whether fans rate him highly or not, he understands the sport at a completely different level than Eddie Hall. That's what made this fight so intriguing. Eddie Hall had the size, power, and strongman reputation. Tommy Fury had the boxing experience. Unfortunately, injuries don't care about hype. They don't care about ticket sales. They simply stop everything in its tracks.
But he's done okay so far. So it's just an important fight. And it's a fight I think boxing needs.
Whenever the words hospital and fight week appear in the same sentence, fans immediately become nervous. Fortunately, Frank Warren's update sounded more optimistic than alarming. The injuries were serious enough to require medical attention, but not necessarily career-threatening. Still, this situation highlights the risks involved in combat sports. One moment you're preparing for a huge event. The next you're sitting in a hospital wondering whether months of preparation have been wasted. For Tommy Fury, this likely felt like another unexpected obstacle in a career that has already seen plenty of disruptions. For Eddie Hall, it was a reminder that preparation can sometimes be just as dangerous as the fight itself.
He's obviously gone to hospital now to get it stitched, but the commission doctor said as much as they're deep cuts and they're bad cuts, they're not nasty cuts. They are cuts that they can be stitched and heal fairly.
Eddie Hearn's point here is actually important. Regardless of what hardcore boxing fans think, Tommy Fury versus Eddie Hall generated enormous attention. It brought together two completely different audiences. Boxing fans wanted to see whether Tommy's skills would shine through. Eddie Hall supporters wanted to see if sheer power could overcome experience. Those types of crossover events attract casual viewers, create headlines, and bring fresh eyes to the sport. That's why so many people were disappointed when injury concerns started threatening the fight, because love it or hate it, this was a fight people wanted to watch.
What now? You know, you sort of feel lost and you lose your purpose. And then the anxiety creeps back in, and then the depression creeps back in. And yeah, it was a tough thing to get through.
This is probably one of the most honest moments we've heard from Eddie Hall. Behind the muscles, the strongman titles, and the larger-than-life personality is still a human being dealing with disappointment. When athletes spend months preparing for a goal and suddenly lose it, the emotional impact can be enormous. Eddie isn't talking about physical pain here. He's talking about purpose. About motivation. About the psychological struggle that comes when everything you've been working toward suddenly disappears. It's a side of professional competition that fans rarely get to see, and it makes this entire story feel much bigger than just one fight.
And the fact is, you've got to know your worth. And I'm not saying I'm a world champion because I'm nowhere near that. I'm not claiming to be, but it's like them. They only fight once, twice a year, and it's like me. You know, I'm not going to fight for anything less than I'm worth. So at the end of the day, if you put it on if it makes money, it makes sense, and that's why I'm getting back in the ring. And like I say, I'll never box for anything that I know I'm not worthy of.
Eddie Hall raises a point that many people never consider. When you're competing on a global stage, failure isn't private. Millions of people see it. Millions of people comment on it. And millions of people suddenly become experts on your career. That pressure can be overwhelming, especially for somebody who has spent years building a reputation as one of the strongest men on the planet. Every setback becomes a headline. Every mistake becomes a talking point. However, from Tommy Fury's perspective, none of that changes the reality of the situation. Tommy fulfilled his side of the deal. He trained. He prepared. He showed up ready to fight. That's why many fans feel the biggest loser in this entire situation may actually be Tommy Fury, who now finds himself waiting for answers instead of stepping into the ring.
I mean, it's a mixture of things, but like the losing things in life, you know, is just hard. And the thing is, when you're at my status, you don't just lose, you know, you don't just lose a competition and you can go home and forget about it, you know. You lose something, or you do bad at something, and the whole world points the fingers, and the whole world's got an opinion, and the whole world has got something to say about you.
This is one of the most mature things Tommy Fury has said throughout his boxing career. A lot of people like to criticize Tommy because of his surname, his reality TV fame, or the opportunities he's received, but what he's talking about here is something every professional fighter understands. Knowing your value. Tommy isn't claiming to be a world champion. He isn't pretending to be something he's not. Instead, he's acknowledging the reality of boxing as both a sport and a business. Fighters put their health, their careers, and their futures on the line every single time they step through the ropes. If you're taking those risks, you have every right to expect fair compensation and meaningful opportunities. What's interesting is how this relates to the Eddie Hall situation. Tommy committed himself to a full training camp. He prepared professionally. He invested months of work into this fight. Then suddenly the injury changes everything. That's frustrating for any fighter, especially when you've already done everything required on your side. Meanwhile, Eddie Hall's supporters continue talking about what might have happened if the fight had gone ahead. But the reality is that Tommy Fury was ready. Tommy Fury was fit. Tommy Fury was prepared to prove that boxing skill beats brute strength, and that's why so many fans are siding with Tommy right now. Whether you like him or not, he handled his business professionally while waiting for answers from the other side.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into that at all. You know, at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, Darren just needs to learn how to be professional. But that's all I'm going to say on him. Like I say, he had his chance, and we will.
One thing that stands out about Tommy Fury lately is that he seems much less interested in online arguments and much more interested in moving forward. In the past, Tommy often got pulled into back-and-forth exchanges. This time, however, he sounds like somebody who has already made peace with the situation and is focused on the next chapter. The phrase, "he had his chance and we will move on," says everything. Tommy isn't sitting around waiting for people to get healthy. He isn't waiting for social media debates to end. He isn't waiting for excuses or explanations. He wants to fight, stay active, and continue building his career. That's a mentality many boxing fans respect. On the other hand, the Eddie Hall situation continues to raise questions. Nobody doubts Eddie's courage. Nobody doubts his willingness to step into difficult challenges. But professional boxing requires reliability. When fights fall apart, it's not just the two fighters who suffer. Promoters suffer. Broadcasters suffer. Fans suffer. Entire training camps are affected. From Tommy's perspective, the most logical response is simply to move on and focus on opportunities that can actually happen, and if we're being completely honest, that's exactly what a professional boxer should do. The sport moves fast. Waiting around rarely benefits anyone. The more Tommy speaks, the more he sounds like a fighter determined to leave the drama behind and focus entirely on his future.
I think you're notching up that queue. You know, as I said, you got Boatsy, you got Richards, you got Callum Smith, you got Yard, you got Johnson. Being involved in a high-profile fight that a lot of people get excited about and winning in style puts you at the top of that list. So these guys have got to get active. You know, if you can't get a shot at those guys, which you can't at the moment, get active and be in big fights.
This is exactly how boxing works at the highest level. Momentum is everything. A fighter can spend years working their way through the rankings, but one high-profile victory can suddenly change everything. That's why activity matters so much. The fighters who stay active, stay visible, and continue winning are usually the ones who create opportunities for themselves. When people discuss Tommy Fury, they often focus on his celebrity status or his surname. But what many overlook is that activity has become one of Tommy's biggest priorities. He understands that staying relevant requires staying busy. Sitting on the sidelines waiting for perfect opportunities can be one of the quickest ways to lose momentum. That's another reason the Eddie Hall situation is so frustrating. Whether fans viewed the fight as a serious boxing contest or a crossover spectacle, it was still a major event that would have generated enormous attention. A victory there would have kept Tommy's name in the headlines and allowed him to continue building toward bigger opportunities. Meanwhile, the longer Tommy remains inactive, the harder it becomes to maintain momentum in a sport that moves incredibly fast. The encouraging sign for Tommy supporters is that he doesn't appear interested in making excuses. He isn't talking about retirement. He isn't talking about stepping away. He's talking about moving forward. That's the attitude fighters need if they want to keep climbing, and judging by his recent interviews, Tommy Fury seems determined to keep moving regardless of what obstacles appear in front of him.
It's one of the worst bits of matchmaking I've ever seen. Do you imagine if I did Avanesian Mets as a main event? I mean, embarrassing, right? And I'll get the viewing figures from the previous BT Sports show, which I can't remember who headlined that one, and DAZN's numbers will beat those shows comfortably. Conlon Wood, Warrington Martinez. These are people that talk absolute rubbish.
Leave it to Eddie Hearn to throw petrol on the fire. Hearn has never been shy about giving strong opinions, and once again he's questioning the value and legitimacy of Tommy Fury versus Eddie Hall as a headline event. But here's the funny thing, if the fight was truly as irrelevant as some critics claimed, people wouldn't have been talking about it non-stop for months. The reality is that this matchup captured attention because it offered something different. You had Tommy Fury, a professional boxer with years of ring experience, stepping in against one of the most recognizable strongmen on the planet. Purists may not have loved it, but casual fans couldn't stop discussing it. That's exactly why the fight generated so much interest. What's also worth noting is that many of the same people criticizing the event were still covering it every single week. They were discussing predictions, analyzing training footage, debating who had the advantage, and creating headlines around every update. That's not something that happens with a fight nobody cares about. From Tommy Fury's perspective, the criticism almost feels unfair. He accepted the challenge. He trained professionally. He prepared for the event exactly as a boxer should. If anything, Tommy deserves credit for taking the matchup seriously while others dismissed it. As for Eddie Hall, this situation has become increasingly difficult to defend. Whether the injury was unfortunate or unavoidable, the end result is still the same. Tommy was left without the fight he spent months preparing for, and that's why many fans continue backing Tommy in this story. He did everything expected of him. He showed up ready. Unfortunately, circumstances outside his control prevented him from proving his point in the ring.
Very nice.
But I would say to him, I would honestly say, listen, you've got to have a sit down. And I admire the passion, I really do. But you've got to have some happiness in your life. And I just look at him and think, how unhappy are you? But I've never known anyone just talk about me in every interview, non-stop.
This might be one of the most revealing comments of the entire build-up. Beneath all the trash talk, the social media clips, and the headlines, Eddie Hearn seems to be raising a bigger question. Where is Eddie Hall mentally after everything that's happened? Throughout his career, Eddie Hall has built a reputation as somebody who attacks every challenge with incredible intensity. That's part of what made him a world's strongest man. It's part of what made him successful. But sometimes that same intensity can become a burden when things don't go according to plan. The injury, the cancellation concerns, the criticism online, and now the retirement talk have all created an environment where every move Eddie makes is being examined under a microscope. That's a difficult position for anyone. At the same time, Tommy Fury appears to be handling the situation differently. While Eddie is discussing setbacks and frustrations, Tommy is discussing future fights and future opportunities. One fighter sounds focused on what went wrong. The other sounds focused on what comes next. That's an important difference, because boxing is ultimately about momentum. Fighters who keep moving forward usually find new opportunities. Fighters who remain trapped in disappointment often struggle to regain their rhythm. What's particularly interesting is the retirement speculation. Is Eddie Hall genuinely considering stepping away? Or is he simply dealing with the emotional fallout of seeing such a massive opportunity disappear? Only Eddie truly knows the answer, but from the outside looking in, Tommy Fury appears to be in a much healthier position mentally. He sounds motivated. He sounds determined. And most importantly, he sounds ready for whatever comes next. Meanwhile, questions continue to surround Eddie Hall's future in combat sports.
I'm telling you
really
now,
let
Eddie,
you down. Just tell
Eddie,
me,
I'm
he
telling
really
you
lets
now, I'm going to say a prayer for you, because you know on fight week, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if my dad clocks you,
Yeah.
I'm telling you now, he'll steam straight into you.
If there was ever any doubt that the Fury family thrives on confrontation, Tommy Fury just erased it. These comments perfectly capture the Fury mindset. Whether it's Tyson, John, or Tommy himself, this family has never been afraid of conflict. In fact, they often seem to perform best when tension is at its highest. What's fascinating is how different the energy feels between the two camps right now. Tommy sounds fired up, but he also sounds excited. There's a confidence in his voice that suggests he still believes big opportunities are waiting around the corner. He doesn't sound defeated. He doesn't sound frustrated. He sounds like a fighter eager to get back into action. Contrast that with the mood surrounding Eddie Hall. Over the past few clips, we've heard discussions about injury, disappointment, anxiety, depression, criticism, and even retirement. It's difficult not to notice the contrast. That's why this story has become bigger than a simple fight cancellation. It's now a story about momentum and mindset. Tommy Fury seems to be moving forward, Eddie Hall seems to be looking backward, and in combat sports, that's often a dangerous place to be. Of course, nobody should underestimate Eddie Hall. He's achieved things most people could never dream of achieving. Becoming the world's strongest man requires a level of determination that few individuals possess. But determination alone doesn't erase disappointment. And right now, disappointment appears to be hanging over Eddie's camp. As for Tommy, the message is simple: he's still here, he's still hungry, and he's still looking for the next challenge. If the fight eventually gets rescheduled, Tommy Fury will almost certainly believe he has unfinished business. And judging by everything we've heard, he remains convinced that his boxing ability would have exposed the difference between a professional boxer and a strongman stepping into a boxing ring.